Hey everybody, I'm rocking the selfie video right here because I don't know what happened to my tripod, but I am here today to do a more requested video of mine, which is basic gear placement, which involves, in this video I'm going to talk about cams and stoppers and the main things to look out for when you're placing both those items, and we'll just move from there. I am right next to a road, so there'll be tons of road noise, but I'll try to edit that out. The thing I'm going to talk about are stoppers. So here we go. A stopper placement. That's essentially what it is. A lot of times I'll have my whole set of stoppers with me. They'll be clipped on just like so, and I look at whatever I'm planning to place on, and I have to guess which size, which I'm a little out of practice on. I tend not to use stoppers a lot, so I know it's a 5. Then I'm going to look at the contours of the crack and the contours of the nut and sort of think about which way it's going to fit best. So it doesn't look as good that way, but it looks better this way. Then what I'm going to do is, the idea is I'm looking for a constriction in the crack that I can slot this into. Here's my constriction right here. It's actually easier to see in real life than on video, but you can see this guy right here. And I'm going to just wiggle this in above. There you go. You see how actually right by the crack right here, it doesn't exactly fit in, but if I go further back, then it slides right in. That's a very good sign. Find it, make sure that I seat it where I want it to be. There we go. Motorcycles. Once I have this seated where I want it to be, I just grab the other stoppers and actually set it. So what I'm going to do is yank down on it a number of times and then really get it sort of locked in place. Now when it comes to gear placements, mainly with stoppers, you're looking for a number of things. One is you're looking for direction of pull. So generally in climbing we fall down, so I would clip a quick draw onto this, and then if I fall down, it's oriented so that way I'm pulling it in the direction of which I set it in. Another thing with nuts especially is you want surface area. So looking at this stopper, you can see how on the left side right here, maybe there's a little bit of a gap because it's wedged against this little crystal right here. But this side, you see how the entire side of it is connecting with the wall. And that's one thing we're looking for. I hear people say stuff like 4 corners of each nut should be touching. I'm not so sure about that. I know some people like to use it as a rating system, but that amount of surface area is really good. One thing I can try to do is, so now when it comes to cleaning nuts especially, you gotta grab your nut tool and then just bump it up in the direction that you set it. See, now it just slides right out. One thing I could do is try placing it further back. So there we have it. Now it's actually on the left side. It's fitting better. It may not look like it on the camera, but the contour right here is going into the contour of the stopper. And that's why they make them like that, so that way they fit a bit better. And there's more of the left side actually in contact with the rock, as well as the right side is just as in contact as before. And so this is a bomber placement right here. Here's an example of a not so bomber placement. The big thing is, even though there's surface area on this right side, there's like nothing on this left side. And you'll also see how the nut is very shallow compared to this one below it, which is deep in the crack. This one is like on the edge of the crack, and that can be a problem. You can even see this is when I'm moving it with my hand like this is simulating the rope pulling on the stopper, and so what will eventually happen is the rope will just lift it out. Another thing is, if you fall on it, you tend to fall a little bit out before going down, and if it can move this much, it's probably just going to rip on you. Actually, well, you know, that corner was pretty well in there, but yeah, this is just an example of a shoddy nut placement. A good way to fix this is to go deeper in. This one doesn't fit going deeper in, so I'd have to use a smaller stopper at that point, which I have right here. This is a number 4. So it's really small, but it's actually so well in there that, yeah, it's kind of like, it's very well in there. And if I pulled it down a bit more to set it a bit, then it would for sure stay where it's at. Right now it's kind of loose. I could pull it down, but I'm worried it's going to be like annoying to take out. Either way, you can see the rope right now would move it, but if I just set it in place, and also maybe moved it around a little bit, it's not really going anywhere. And so that's the idea with stoppers and with cams alike, is you really want to get them deep in there, because that'll lessen the chances of them ripping out if you fall on them. Now let's talk about examples involving cams. And so this is a cam. More generic name for these are SLCDs, spring-loaded camming devices. The Black Diamond cams are just called the Camelot. And so ideally with these things is there's a specific range you want to fit these into the cracks. And where these do work really well, where stoppers don't, is on completely parallel-sided cracks. Like this thing. You see how this is parallel-sided? There's no way I'm getting a stopper in there. It's also quite large, so you won't want to carry a stopper that big. So that's where the cams come into play. These have a specific range. Here it is completely unrestricted in umbrella form. Here it is fully restricted. And so what we want is we don't want it to unfold completely in the crack, because that's what we call undercamming. And we don't want it to be completely pulled in while you stick it in the crack, because that's overcamming. Overcamming also leads to stuck cams quite a bit. So what we want is something around here. Using the holes helps out a lot. So if you have anywhere from, well, that's a bit wide, but about that many to the first hole. Second hole is more of a danger zone, but first hole is about as small as you want this to go, where the holes line up right there. And then it can go out to, you know, about 90, maybe a little less, like 80 degrees. There we have it. So right there, that's textbook cam placement. The idea is that you want the lobes to be touching the rock in about the middle of them. That's pretty great. You also want all the lobes, all 4 of them, to be equal with each other. So let's try to find a less equal placement. There we go, that's a bit better. So these two are, actually I think no lobe is the same on this placement. You can see how these guys are really far apart. Well, this one's pushed in, that one's pushed away. These are just all over the place. You want something where that all lobes ideally are about equal. Now these aren't exactly equal, but the cool part is with these dual stem cams, they have a bit more stability, and so don't have to worry about being a little bit off. I've even fallen on cams like this before, and they still held me. So you'd be surprised at what these little guys can hold. Right there, that's textbook placement. One thing you can do is, if you aren't getting the lobes right, you know, just for some reason they're always unequalized, is flip the cam over. And then maybe you'll have better luck. Actually, in this case, you see how none of the lobes are equalizing. So, well, maybe that's best spot in this orientation, but what I can do is flip the cam over and get it in the right spot, and now they're great. That's a really good trick you can use because of the offset of the lobes. Another thing that helps with the stability of cams, I do have to grab a different one. Here we go. Is if I stick this one in here, this is sort of a horizontal placement. It's like diagonal-ish, but if it was horizontal, I can take the 2 outer lobes and put them facing the ground, so that way it adds more stability to my cam. This also is a textbook placement. You can see perfectly parallel crack, all the lobes are just about equal, and it's in the cam's like really good range. With cams, you also have to think about surface area, obviously, for contact with the rock, but you also have to think about direction of fall. All the same things you'd think about with stoppers, you pretty much think about cams. So when you're placing them, and you'll hear all sorts of different people say what they prefer placing them with, but overall, as usual, it depends on the different situations you're in. So when I'm right here, I'm gonna pull the legs in, or the lobes in, let it go down. Easy way to do this is just pull it all the way, slip it in, and then let it expand. And then if I'm climbing straight up here, if I move to a different angle, you'll see how the cam is slightly away, but facing down. In fact, this is actually a little bit far for me. I place it something like that. That's kind of not the best placement because of where the lobe is. There you go, let me throw it further in. So you can see how it's down, and if you fall down, so that's directing the downward pull onto this carabiner and the cam itself. Some people say to put it a little bit like this, you know, slightly angled out and down, because when you fall out and then down. But you see, that happens a lot. And that's happened to me on many falls where the cam moves in the crack, so that's why I prefer to just place it down. But it's kind of to each their own. In many cases, they'll actually work. So one thing that was happening right there is, see how the cam's moving back in the crack? That's what we call walking, the dreaded walking. And so one way we can avoid doing that, there you go, is place either a quick draw on this thing, you clip it right here, or you could place a shoulder length sling, or as many people call them, alpine draws or trad draws. And if you place that shoulder length sling, that adds a lot more play in the sling, and it won't affect your gear as much. Those come in handy a lot when you're placing stoppers as well as cams. But the idea is you don't really want to overdo it. So finding that balance between not overextending and not underextending your cams is a must do. But it does take a while to sort of get to that point, you know, you just need experience for that. When it comes to horizontal placements, more horizontal, I've heard some things about people talking about how cams aren't made for horizontal catches, but they are. You'll be surprised at what these things can really do, and how much sketchy gear can actually hold you. But you know, sometimes you just don't know. Best thing is just to try to do the best placement you can. Another thing that people will say is they'll say cams are multi-directional or stoppers are multi-directional. I've heard a bunch of people say this, and it's true and not true. The real thing is that a piece is multi-directional if you set it to be multi-directional. For example, this one right here, I put it horizontal, so if there's an upward pull, it'll stop that. If there's a downward pull, it'll stop that. That is multi-directional. If I place a stopper, and I place it for one direction of pull, like I did in you know, the first part of the video, none of those stoppers are multi-directional. So when people tell you stuff like stoppers are multi-directional, and they say it so declaratively, like all stoppers are multi-directional, it's just not true. You have to think about what's going to happen to the piece in these different angles, and you have to, if you want to make it multi-directional, then go ahead, or if you want to set a multi-directional piece, but don't just outright believe that every cam placement you have is going to be multi-directional just because you heard that cams are multi-directional. Another thing also to watch out for is dirt and water. Anything that affects the cam's ability to cling to the rock. You can see this is just full of sludge and slime. Wet rock, cams will hold on wet rock, depending on the rock. You know, like sandstone, it'll probably just blow the rock away. But wet granite, I've climbed on that before, and cams hold on a lot of wet granite. This is it's really wet in here. There's even a puddle, so I'd be a bit wary about that piece. In here, if I get this thing out, you can see a lot of dirt. This dirt is kind of along the rock, so it's not like super bad. If I feel it, actually, it's not really too much dirt. It may just be more of the texture of the rock. But when you find a really dirty crack, like this one right here, so there's even a band-aid in here, something like this isn't even a good place you want to place a cam, except for maybe along these two things. One thing you can do is farming. It's another use for your trusty nut tool right here. And just scrape along, clear out all the extra rocks, dirt, and debris in order to make that placement a little bit better. It is very important to farm if you're especially using stoppers, but it's also really nice with cams. And sometimes they can really clear up good placements. But careful not to get too carried away in tunnel vision and cleaning out a crack for 10 minutes on a long route just because you want to place a piece. That is definitely not worth it. Well guys, that's pretty much all I have to say about basic trad placements. Again, just stoppers and cams, which are the most common piece of trad protection out there. I do plan on doing more videos on like trad cams or ball nuts or big bros, or just like whatever other gear they have out there. But I just wanted a basic video to talk about the basic placements and the essential aspects of placements too. One thing I cannot stress enough about this is really take a class or learn from someone who knows a lot more than you and has been doing this a while, because there's so much nuance to trad climbing, and there's so much uncertainties when you start out, and like, is this piece going to hold? Is that piece going to hold? Is this anchor good? It's just really helpful to go with someone who knows more, or with a guide, or take a class on trad climbing, so that way you can have a good baseline of knowledge which goes more in depth into the different subjects I talked about. You've had time to play around with trad gear, as well as you've had someone looking over your back telling you if it's actually like good or not. And that's very useful knowledge to know. And then when you first get into trad climbing, just take it slow, take small climbs, do maybe some mixed climbs where you can clip bolts but also place gear. And just build yourself up from that, and slowly increase depending on your comfort level, the amount of climbs, the large climbs or whatever. But I just would really recommend taking a class. There's no video on YouTube you can find that will really help you with your specific trad climbing. So thanks for watching, and then I'll see you in the next video.